Hi all, I have an absolutely amazing and instructive game to show you. This time Leela ID 10846 against Komodo-9.02. So this was in round 4 of the gauntlet set up by Thomas Kaz. I'll put the specific details of hardware and timing in the pinned comment of this video. So let's have a look. C4, C5, the English opening, knight f3, knight f6, g3, knight c6, bishop g2. So this is the end of the book given to both to start play from this position. Black plays e5, which does weaken that d5 square. Knight c3. We have bishop e7, white castles, h6, which does prevent, in some cases, later d3, bishop g5 taking on f6 to weaken d5 further. d3, so black's not worried now. d6, well, not worried about bishop g5 anyway. Knight e1. Now this is a classic torture recipe. I hate this when I'm playing with the black pieces, players playing knight c2, and then there's ideas of coming into d5. We have bishop e6, but this is very highly nuanced here. Black might liberate potentially with d5. White plays the highly nuanced f4. So being able to play f5 is important, so it makes d5, it renders it impossible, it would seem. So black has to tread carefully here. f4 is a bit of a commitment though, it has weakened some dark squares. Black castled, and now white further commits to f5, driving the bishop back, which creates a bit of a liability pawn. Knight c2, rook b8. And here I found this is incredibly instructive. I've actually gone through the game several times trying to work out the big differences. What to do about d5 and f5 here. What would you do? Would you play e4 or would you play knight e3? What are the pros and cons of both approaches? If I give you 5 seconds, maybe you want to pause the video and think about that. Just a positional question for you here. e4 or knight e3? Now, I'm not saying this is definite, but Leela does make the case in this game for knight e3. Knight e3 keeps the bishop scope there across the diagonal. It also means the pawn hasn't been committed. This pawn could be useful for A, kicking a knight later with, say a knight comes to d4 later with e3, and B, say black challenges on this diagonal later to try and weaken white further on the dark squares. Then e3 could interrupt this diagonal as well. So the pawn being on e2 may actually be very important. The knight's also supporting f5. Just to give you the gist of things with e4, I really couldn't see how white gets anything after e4. And I've checked this several times. Knight d4, it's very difficult to kick this knight once the pawn's committed. So say knight e3 here, it seems as though there's a nice grip intuitively, that white has a nice grip, but actually black has a good position here. This position, it seems to be a very difficult nut to crack. White might have a small edge, but black seems to be pretty stable. The first evidence here. So we see knight e3 actually being played. Knight d4. And now there might be the prospect of b5. This is clamped down on with a4. Yeah, if knight ed5, then black could take and actually win, by the way, the f5 pawn here as well. So the knight is holding f5 as well for the moment against the bishop and knight. So clamping down against b5, rook e8, and now the curious a5, just in advance of any b5 to be able to take en passant. So that's interesting as well. Queen c8 putting more pressure on f5. If we look at trying for b5 instead to try and generate some counterplay, a takes. This position doesn't really do black any favours. The rook doesn't want to be a target to the bishop. Note we haven't closed that diagonal, so the bishop's got full view on that diagonal. So something like this, bang, knight takes e7 check. Bishop takes b7. So that's another perk of not having played e4 in these variations. And this is just a disaster for black, losing the pawn. So queen c8, not trying to be ambitious. Another alternative to queen c8, rook f8. This position, for example, again, it's just pretty passive for black. And in fact, here is demonstrated that the pawn's useful on e2 because of e3, interrupting the diagonal, stopping a strategic exchange, which might be in black's interest to do. This position, and then later that can be kicked. So there's other perks demonstrated of the pawn being left on e2. This position could actually be devastating for black, this kind of scenario. Here's a fictional continuation, check, and mating. So yeah, this looks curious. And just one more try, a6. This is another scenario where it seems as though white's just better here, being able to kick the knight. So there are big perks of the way this has been played so far with the knight on e3. Maybe in some respects it seems awkward, but it really does do a lot of things which committing a pawn on e4 wouldn't do. We have bishop e4, just protecting that pawn now. Bishop d8. g4, white. Leela is not afraid of moving pawns now. It seems black hasn't got enough grip on the dark squares. We have knight c6, which seems as though there's a threat to a5, but this is just ignored. Now, just before we look at that, you might think keeping the knight there on knight h7 is very logical. So let's have a look at this. Knight ed5. This, it seems white can just play for h4 and carry on after e3 with a big advantage, smashing through with g5. It would just be a nightmare. And the knight's even controlling g3. There's no tactic there, so that knight has to move back. So knight c6, bishop d2, just ignoring a5. Moving the bishop away from the king side is just asking for trouble intuitively. Knight b4 was played. Let's have a quick look though. Knight takes. Knight ed5. So the bishop's kind of overloaded on both sides of the board here. Let's say b6. Knight takes. Bishop d5 is probably... This needs an investigation. Technically this looks pretty strong instead of knight d5 here. So g5, this is like crushing stuff, with e4 only now to open up the queen, and white has a formidable attacking position here, and this can just lead to a total disaster for black. Yeah, with a big knight on d5, this is just a fictional scenario where white's crashing through. So yeah, there's very interesting variations after taking on e5, which you might want to look in the pinned comments of this video. So anyway, knight b4, ignoring the a5 pawn. We have queen e1, and this is a perk of the knight on e3 because there's no knight c2. The knight's controlling c2 as well. The knight's eyeing an aggressive square, protecting a key pawn and protecting c2. This knight on e3 is fantastic. Bishop e7, h4, and now black plays knight takes e4, knight takes e4, bishop c6, and now queen g3, and it seems like an easy walkover with g5 is coming up. There seems to be no resistance, significant resistance on the dark squares in this position. Black plays bishop takes e4. Now visually, okay, the poor e pawn is now trapped. It's like a double pawn, but look at this locking down of a key square. White doesn't mind this. f6, very passive. b3, and now we see knight c6 going back. On, say, b5, then maybe white can take en passant, take that knight off, and leave this magnificent knight versus the bishop. Strategically, very pleasant position here. White has a big advantage because of that huge knight entrenched in the position. So we see knight c6, knight d5, we still have a huge knight, and now g5. It just seems so easy the way Leela has played it. Basically, rook g8, and yes, the form pawn is likely to be installed with g6, a form pawn, thorn. Many of you expressed, where are the form pawn games recently? Well, let's see. Behold, there might be one coming up. There's a form pawn over here as well, though. But the more significant ones that we like are near the king. Now here, for example, b takes this position is just very pleasant for white. This kind of scenario is just huge for white. So black's got to be careful here about opening up that b file. So closes instead. Free hand for white over here, closing. No thing to worry about on the queen side now much. Rook g1. Behold, the fawn pawn. The fawn pawn has arrived on g6, and it suffocates the black king. White basically needs to just put more pressure here for a sack on h6, and then maybe either g7 or just queen h6 is going to be crushing. That's the basic principle here. Once this killer fawn pawn has been established, look at this, queen h5. Bishop takes h6 is begging. Black plays queen f8, only move nearly, probably. Because if bishop f8, there's knight takes f6. And here, bishop takes h6. This is just killing. Absolute murderous. Crushing. Checkmate. Let's put it on the board. So we have queen f8. Rook g3. White can just build up, for example, to double rooks and then play bishop takes and g7 at minimum. Not only that, lurking here behind the scenes is the threat of knight e3 g4 takes h6. For bishop takes h6. Either is killing. This is absolutely winning. Knight e3 could have been used. Leela is enjoying this position, basically. Look at this. This was absolutely... There's nothing black can do here. It's beyond any calculation depth. The damage has totally been irrevocably done to black's position, basically. So Leela has multiple winning plans at this point. Knight c2, as if to say, please, no knight e3, I can take it off. Bishop g5, just a torturous waiting move in many respects. The bishop can't be taken because hg with f6 to follow doesn't bear thinking about. This position is absolutely crushing as well. So we see actually after bishop g5, knight a3, and cruelty to the knight. The knight's not allowed to come to c2 to allow this path of winning. Knight e3 to g4 is potentially possible. Bishop d8. Bishop drops back, which does mean that knight e3 without interruption for the knight. Yeah, Komodo is giving up the knight now in total desperation, realizing its fate. It's absolutely just hopeless. So again, there's just so many ways of winning this possession. The game actually ended after bishop d8. The evaluation too high for both sides. So let's continue. This is one way. Rook c g1 just doubling. Bang, bishop takes h6 is one way. Clear cut. For knight takes f6 check there. Absolute devastation. And you see if the king moves, then there's rook takes, bang, rook takes g7. So this is absolute devastation, as an example. So what intrigued me about this game is that maybe we sometimes lazily play e4 and should consider knight e3 in this kind of English opening when black's weak in d5. It's very, very interesting. Blocking in the e-pawn has huge perks, it seems. It doesn't block in the bishop. It means that e3 is retained as a tactical device to drive away a knight or blunt the diagonal. If a bishop's trying to exchange on diagonal, that's often a nuisance to English opening players when you try for such an attack. The way it was played, it was made to look easy. There was no resistance the way it was played on the dark squares. The fawn pawn was installed, and as we know, fawn pawns can be extremely lethal. So this is another fawn pawn triumph. And there's another one over here as well, kind of. But we prefer the kingside ones. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.